Most people in the United States own a car. Some folks and families own 2 cars. I confess that my wife and I own 3 cars, and at one point, I'm embarrassed to say, we owned 4. True. But how much does car ownership really cost us? And is it possible to live without a car? My name is Rob Berger. I'm the founder of DoughRoller.net and the host of this podcast. Today, we're going to look at these questions, and the real goal is to do 2 things: to demystify financial freedom and what it really means, and to help us and maybe even force us to look at money a little differently.
Welcome to the DoughRoller Podcast, where the best thing money can buy is financial freedom. We help you make more, spend less, and invest the rest. And now your host, Rob Berger.
Whether you're just starting out, buried under a mountain of debt, or well on your way to financial freedom, this is the podcast to help you take your finances to the next level. Hey everybody, hope you're having a great day. Have a show for you today that's a little different, I think. Hopefully you'll find it interesting. And there's kind of a story behind it. About a year ago, I started writing a book, and I even enlisted the help of 5 of you to kind of review some things that I was doing. And I got to the point of a detailed outline, and the folks that were willing to help me did a great job of looking at it and critiquing it and making some suggestions. And then I kind of just lost focus. And as I was setting up my goals this year, we talked a lot about habits at the beginning of 2015. There were podcasts on habits and things like that. I started to try to evaluate why wasn't I getting this book done? And I ultimately concluded that I was just not passionate about the subject matter of the book, which had to do with retirement accounts, which is certainly an important topic for most of us. So it's not that it wasn't a valuable topic. It's just that at least at the moment, maybe I'll get back to that book. It wasn't resonating with me. And about a month or 2 ago, I think I finally stumbled upon the idea that does resonate with me. And the result has been I'm probably 50 to 75% through a first draft of the book, which has got me pretty excited. And one of the reasons I'm willing to now kind of start to talk about it on the podcast is I hope it will become a reality. In fact, I hope to publish it this summer. That's my plan. And I wanted to share with you today one of the concepts that I talk about in this book. The book really is designed to, I think, challenge conventional thinking about money and conventional approaches about money. Those of us, and that of course includes all of you, that do things like listen to personal finance podcasts and read personal finance and investing books and read personal finance blogs and websites. We're all already thinking about these issues, whatever they may be: saving, investing, credit scores, getting out of debt, budgeting. The list goes on and on. We're already thinking about these things. That's why we're doing things like listening to this podcast, and why I started DoughRoller.net in the first place, right? And so I hope the book will help folks like, well, all of you, but frankly, you're not the reason I wrote it. I hope that doesn't come off the wrong way. You're not really. I kind of wrote it for people that don't listen to personal finance blogs or podcasts, and don't read books and don't read blogs. The folks that kind of go through life making day-to-day decisions about their money, month-to-month decisions about their money, but don't really think about it beyond that, maybe until it's too late, until they're close to retirement. And, you've got that feeling in the pit of your stomach that you just haven't planned as well as you should have. And by the way, some of you listening to this, maybe that's where you were, and you're starting to do things about that. And listening to this podcast might be one of those things, and I'm grateful for that. But that's really who the book was for folks to get folks that maybe haven't given a lot of thought about their money, a way to look at money differently. And the reason for that was that I think so many people, and I can certainly at different times in my life put myself in this category, we look at money on a day-to-day, maybe a month-to-month basis. That's about as far as it goes. We look at money day-to-day as we're just making spending decisions, whether it's where we're going to eat for the day, or decisions at the shopping mall or whatever. We're making daily decisions. Maybe we're making monthly decisions. Certainly we are. For example, when we go to buy a home and we ask ourselves, well, how much can we afford? That's usually defined as what payment can I make given my income? And we do the same thing with a car. We're going to talk about specifically about cars today, but it's the same kind of thinking. What can I afford by way of a car payment? And that's kind of how we think. And that's certainly how I thought back in the day when I would buy cars. And oftentimes we will buy as much as we think we can afford. Certainly that's what the car dealer wants us to do, and that's what the real estate agent wants us to do. I mean, I don't mean that to speak negatively about car dealers and real estate agents. I think most of the ones that I've dealt with, they don't want me to make a bad decision for me, but that's certainly how they're thinking about this issue too. You ask a realtor how much you can afford, and they're going to do a calculation based on your income and show you this is the maximum amount you can borrow, and this is the maximum payment that you can qualify for on a month-to-month basis. So one of my goals of the book that I'm writing is to get us to think beyond the day-to-day and beyond the month-to-month, and to challenge this sort of way of thinking about money. And that's what I want to do today. And this is actually, I'm giving you a glimpse into the book and what I have planned. This particular topic comes from a chapter that I have a draft of. I've written it, and it deals with cars and thinking about the cost of owning a car. Now, and how might we go about doing that? So that's the goal for today. Actually, where it's kind of think of it as a thought experiment, if you will. We're going to look at 2 or 3 sort of hypotheticals, different ways one could approach owning a car, and not the short-term impact, because that's easy to figure out, right? If your payment's $500 a month, well, you got to pay $500 a month. We don't need any math. We don't, nothing. We've got that. But rather, look at it over the long term, and not only look at a single car purchase, because most of us are going to own many cars over our lifetime. So look at it from not just, a long term, but kind of a really long term. And to do that through a handful of hypotheticals that we are going to run through today. And that's the plan for today. I am going to run through some numbers, but you will be able to see all of these in the show notes. And I'm kind of going back to the old way I used to do the URL so you can find these easier. For today's podcast, if you go to DoughRoller.net/podcast172, that's what we're on, number 172, DoughRoller.net/podcast172, you'll be able to find the article that goes, we call them show notes, but the article that goes with this podcast. It will include all of the numbers. And you can always as well go to DoughRoller.net/thepodcast, and I've got a widget there that allows you to see all of the podcasts that I've recorded and to kind of scroll through them very quickly, find one that you might be interested in. But for today's podcast, you will be able to get the show notes, DoughRoller.net/podcast172. So that's the plan for today. Let's get rolling. So I want to begin today with trying to figure out how much one could save and what kind of wealth one could build up if they'd never owned a car. Now, to do that, we have to kind of compare that kind of person. And by the way, the point of this podcast is not to preach at you not to own a car. I own 3 of them. But to compare that kind of person to someone who does own a car. So we have to make some assumptions, right? And we're going to build on this, but this is just the starting point. So I'm going to assume we're going to compare the person who doesn't own a car with a person who not only owns a car, but buys one fairly frequently. This may or may not be you. But imagine someone, we'll just begin at age 25, and they buy their first car, and we'll assume they spend $20,000. And they drive it for 5 years, trade it in, buy a new one. And we're just going to assume the trade-in value is 50%, so they trade it in for $10,000. And they buy another car, and we're just going to keep the price flat. We're going to just ignore inflation. We'll just assume they buy their second car. This would be now at age 30. For a total of $20,000, they have a $10,000 trade-in value, so they pay $10,000. And we're just going to assume they repeat this every 5 years until they're 70. They buy their last car at age 70. We're just going to assume it's still $20,000. Yes, it would obviously be more than that now 45 years out, but we'll just assume $20,000. And they have a $10,000 trade-in, so they pay $10,000, and they drive that car until they're 75. And then I don't know what happens then. I just stop there. Hopefully they've got children who can drive them around. I'm hoping my kids will be driving me around by the time I'm 75, if God keeps me on this on the earth that long. But that's sort of the plan. We're going to start at age 25, buy a car every 5 years, $20,000. After you have your first car, you can trade it in for $10,000. So effectively, if you do all that math, you own 10 cars. You own 10 cars over your life. And I'm trying to think how many cars I've owned. I think I've probably already owned 10, which I guess is kind of pathetic. But in any event, in our more sort of simplified hypothetical, we're going to assume this person owns a total of 10 cars. Now, if we think about that, just how much did they spend? We can wrap our minds around that, right? They have 10 cars total, $20,000 for the first one, $10,000 for the remaining 9 after you factor in the trade-in. So 10,000 times 9, obviously 90,000. And then for the first car, it was 20, 110 grand. Our minds intuitively, maybe we have to do a little math, but that kind of makes sense to us. What's not intuitive is when we start to ask ourselves questions like, well, what if we compare that person to someone who didn't own a car, and the person who didn't own a car could invest that money, could invest $20,000 at age 25, could invest another $10,000 at age 30, and age 35, and age 40, all the way through age 70. What would they have by the time they turned 75? Well, see, that's where things start to break down. You add an interest rate or a return, let's say of 8% on all of these investments. Now it's not so easy to figure out what they're going to have, because now we get into compounding. And that's actually part of the book I'm writing, is that our minds don't intuitively grasp compounding. When we slow down and think about it, okay, we know compounding. We know it really adds up to a lot of money over a long period of time. We can conclude it's a big number, but intuitively we can't probably even take a guess, a reasonable guess. Try it now. What do you think? What do you think a person who we've got the person buying the car and spending all that money? What about someone else who said, no, I'm not going to do that, and I'll invest that money at 8% return from age 25? What would I have when I turned 75? You can take a guess. I'm going to give you the number in a minute. I can tell you I wouldn't have come close. And sometimes thinking that compound interest does more than it does, I sometimes overshoot the number. I think, that'd be $1 trillion, right? Well, no, not quite. But I actually did the math. And yes, it took me a long time, and hopefully I got it right. But I know there are some of you out there that actually check me on all this. So if we assume an 8% return, what do we have? Well, we can start with car number 1. That was 20 grand at age 25. So if instead of buying that car, we invested, what will we have at age 75? That's a pretty simple calculation. 20 grand, 8% return for 50 years comes out to $938,032.25. That's a big number. Now, I don't have these in my notes. I believe I was compounding that annually when I calculated it. It'd actually be a little higher potentially if you compound it monthly. It depends, actually, if you assume you make the $20,000 investment at the beginning of the year or at the end of the year. But at this point, that's more detail and into the weeds than we need to go. Almost $1 million. But that was an expensive $20,000 car. Now, I know some of you are saying, wait a minute, Rob, but that's not going to be 50 years from now. $1 million ain't going to be worth $1 million. You're right. And we could maybe assume a 6% return or a 5% return to try to address inflation, and then we could raise the cost of each car each 5 years for inflation, and that would change the number some, but we'd still be talking about a big number. And I wanted to keep this simple. So that first car alone, $938,000 if you invest the money instead. What about car number 2? Well, that's $10,000, right? Because we get the benefit of the trade-in, so we're only out of pocket $10,000 for car number 2, and because we're buying it at age 30, we can only invest that for 45 years. So we're dealing with half the investment and for 5 years shorter. But what would that be worth 45 years later at 8%? $319,000. Car number 3, $10,000 for 40 years, $217,000. Car number 4, $147,000. I could keep going. You can see all the numbers in the show notes, but if you go down to the bottom of car 10, that's only worth $15,000 roughly, because you're investing $10,000 for 5 years. But the bottom line, when you add it all up, just over $1.9 million. Yes, it's not adjusted for inflation. It would still be over $1 million adjusted for inflation. A big, big number. Now, of course, we've had 10 cars over a lifetime, right? But still a really big number for cars. Now, 1.9 million just assumes one car. Now let's add a family. Now let's just multiply that by 2. Or, if you're, I call myself an idiot, maybe too much. I don't know, maybe not enough. If you're like me and you've got 3 cars, of course, I hopefully I don't own 3 cars for 50 years, and we haven't. But you can start to multiply this. I'm just assuming one car, 1.9 million. Now let's just make it a family and assume 2 cars, you're talking almost $4 million before adjustments for inflation, but $4 million. That's a lot of money for a car. Now, this is kind of just step one in our thought experiment, because some of you are saying, yeah, that's fine, Rob, and I appreciate the math, and, that's great, but I need a car. Maybe some crazies out there don't own a car. Or if you live in New York City, maybe you don't own a car. But let's get real here. Well, first of all, I'm with you. I own cars. So the point of this podcast is not to convince anyone that they shouldn't own a car. And in fact, we're going to go through and take this to the next level to show how those who do own a car and do need a car can still make some decisions that can really add a tremendous amount of wealth over the long term. However, I don't want to just dismiss this idea of not owning a car. I think one of the mistakes that certainly I've made in the past, I think a lot of people do, is we fail to think outside the box. We kind of just assume things. The American dream, we just assume we spend a ton of money on a college education and we have student debt, and we just assume we then go buy a new car for 5 years worth of payments, and we get a house with a big mortgage, and this is just what we do. And frankly, that's kind of what I did in the first 10 or 15 years after graduating from college and law school. I kind of just did the things that I thought people did. I mean, as I look back on them, I wouldn't say I made any profound mistakes or I don't have any deep, dark regrets about how I spent money, although I certainly made mistakes, and I can certainly see how I would have done things differently had I thought about them in a different way, perhaps as I think about them today. And that's kind of one of the things that I want to do in this podcast. So as I was preparing for this podcast, I thought, why don't I find someone who doesn't own a car and bring them on the show and talk to them about how they made that decision, how they get around. And so I went out and I tried to find someone. Let me introduce you to him. Alan, welcome to the show.
Hi, Robert. I'm glad to be here.
Well, I'm so glad you could take a few minutes out of your day to talk about not owning a car. We'll get to that in a minute, which is an amazing thing, particularly for me, given that we own 3, but that's a whole nother story. Why don't you tell folks a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Okay, well, I am the CEO of Real Money Life, which is a social network designed to help people get better with money from wherever they are. And I am busy day and night, 7 days a week, starting up this amazing venture.
Great. And you don't own a car.
That's correct.
So how's that possible?
Well, it's been possible for humans for most of our existence.
Fair point.
It's you know what? I grew up just like everybody else, and I grew up in New Mexico and then went to the University of Texas. And by the time I graduated college, I believed, without even thinking about it, that an adult person, needed a car. It was never a question. But fast forward about 4 years or 3 years, by the time I was 28 and living in San Francisco and having a big career change and wanting to simplify my life. And if you've ever been to San Francisco, having a car in San Francisco is not easy. It's unbelievable having to find parking spaces every day and dealing with tiny parking spaces. It's a lot of stress. And I just decided one day that, you know what, I'm going to try living without a car. And I sold my car, and really I haven't looked back since. It's pretty easy to live without a car.
Well, now some listening would say, yeah, but you live in San Francisco. Do you still live there?
No. Granted, I have chosen places to live that were, let's say, non-car friendly.
Right.
So I wouldn't necessarily live in a city like Dallas, Texas, for example. So it's very you create your priorities and then you design your life around them.
Well, so what kind of place? I mean, do you live in a city today, or you don't live in San Francisco? But
no, I live in Corvallis, Oregon, which is a university town of about 50,000 people.
So how do you get around?
Bicycle, walking, bus, ride share. When we do need a car, we borrow a car from a friend.
Okay.
or I can rent a car. The car rental is just about a quarter of a mile away, and I walk every day. I walk a lot, but what's beautiful is what people call exercise. For me, is going shopping.
Right. That's a good point. So well, I mean, now, so how long have you been without a car? How many years?
Since 1992, with the exception, I did have a car from 2005 to 2008. So there was 3 years in there when I did have a car. But for the last 20 some odd years, I have not had a car.
Wow. And what's the most inconvenient part? What happens in your life where you think, I really wish I had a car right now? This is the worst part about not having a car.
The worst part about not having a car is I want to go hiking. I want to go to the beach. And in Corvallis, you're an hour away from really beautiful things, mountains, ocean, a lot of great hiking. And sometimes I want to do those things and we don't have a car available. But then what ends up happening is there are beautiful hiking trails within biking distance, and we just find something else to do. It always works out.
All right. Do you socially, has it been like, to your friends? Maybe you've been without a car for so long, people just know, Alan, he's the guy without a car. Right? But I mean, does it cause any issues with friends or family?
Not really. No, it's the thing is there are so many cars in this country. There are so many people with cars. It's not a problem not to have one. It's kind of like if you find yourself without a phone today and you're walking around in Washington, D.C. and you need to make a phone call, I have a very strong suspicion that you would manage to get yourself a phone. Like, just ask somebody, can I use a phone for a local call? You'll have a phone at your beck and call within seconds. It's the same with cars. Everybody's got one. So, hey, can you come swing by and pick me up? Hey, can I borrow your car to do this or that? It's not a problem at all, ever.
Yeah, it's funny. The phone story you just mentioned actually happened to me the other day, where my phone was dead. And I was able to find a phone pretty quickly. So have you ever calculated just how much you've saved by not owning a car?
Robert, I hadn't thought about it until you asked me that question as we were preparing for this interview. And I would estimate that I save probably about maybe $1,200 a year, $100 a month, let's say, when you think of insurance and gas and the wear and tear on an automobile. And if you live in a city, there's parking to consider as well.
Right.
So conservatively speaking, I would say $1,200, which adds up with compound interest to be, certainly in the hundreds of thousands of dollars.
Well, and that doesn't even include the cost of the car.
Yeah, exactly.
So have these savings allowed you to accomplish other things in your life?
Well, let's talk about what I'm doing right now. So I've created this real money platform, which I've been able to create with my own funding. I've been able to do it with my own money. So I haven't had to go out and find external funding. And that's a 6-figure investment. And I've been able to do that investment basically because I had the money. And I never put 2 and 2 together until this interview, but certainly that amount of money is about the amount of money that I've saved not having a car.
That's amazing. Well, that's terrific. And tell us about what you're doing there. I mean, you've mentioned Real Money Life. It's realmoneylife.com, right?
Yes, sir.
So how's that working out for you? What's going on there?
Oh, it's awesome. Basically, it's a community where people can come and open up and be real about what's going on with them financially. It's a place where experts come and discuss things directly with people. It's an education platform where financial experts from all over the world give courses on money. And the That's what we do. It's kind of like Facebook, except that instead of people liking you for your piano playing cat, which we all love, they like you for doing things like saving an extra $50 or opening up a Roth IRA or these kinds of things.
Right. That's fantastic. What a great idea.
Thank you. Thank you.
Although I have to confess, there are times when I like the piano playing cat. I much prefer my Roth IRA. So
who doesn't like a piano playing cat?
Yeah,
huh?
yeah. Well, that's terrific. Well, hey, I appreciate you're taking the time out of your day. It's funny. I wanted to find someone who didn't own a car, and you were actually the perfect person because someone that lives in New York City that doesn't own a car is not exactly all that unusual, and even maybe San Francisco where you used to live.
Yeah.
But living in a relatively small town in Oregon, even if it's bicycle friendly. Still, I'm sure the vast majority of people there have a car, and it's just fascinating to hear your story and how you've managed without it. And it doesn't just listening to you, it doesn't sound like you miss a car at all.
Not at all. Can I speak to this a little bit? I want to say that you get used to it. You become creative. It becomes an opportunity to meet people. There are things which I could say to the average listener that they would think, wow, I could never do that. But it's kind of a step-by-step thing. And you put yourself in the position and then you find yourself doing it. So, for example, when finally we moved to Corvallis, well, it rains a lot here. So how do we get by? It's easy. You wear wet clothes, these really nice clothes that keep you dry. And they come on and off within 2 minutes, and it's not a problem. It really is not a problem. It's just another habit, like brushing your teeth or tying your shoes. It's not complicated. And even I want to put a postscript on this. I went back to Texas and stayed in Texas for 6 months about 5 years ago. And I made it without a car. I did it. I survived in Texas without a car, and it was no problem. Yeah. It requires a little bit of improvisation, if you will, but I didn't miss not having a car.
Well, that's great. Does it snow where you are?
It does once every blue moon.
Okay, so you don't have to contend with that.
Even, you know what? Even if you have to contend with the snow, like I said, everybody has a car. And if you know your neighbors, this is the thing. When you don't have a car, you get to know your neighbors.
I'm sure. Do your neighbors like you?
You'd have to ask them.
Maybe I'll have you. I'm going to interview Alan's neighbors for the next show. All right. Well, I appreciate your time. One last question that occurred to me. Is you said you bought a car, you had a car for 3 years a few years ago.
I did.
Why?
Well, I was married in Austin, Texas, and then I got divorced. And I had a housing in the north part of the city, and my office was in the south part of the city. And so my life was just not organized to not have a car. When I was married, I had put my office very close to where we were living so that I didn't need to have a car. But when we split, housing opened up on the other side of town. And so I got a car basically to get me through that time.
Yeah.
But it lasted for longer than I would have liked. But as soon as I was able to get a new place, which was closer to my office, the car became unnecessary, and finally I sold it.
Right. Okay. Well, that's great.
So I guess what I realize in your question there is that the first thing you decide is that you don't need a car. Well, first organize your life around not having one. So find yourself a job or a house, a house and a job which are close enough to each other, or with good transportation one to the other. And then when you're ready, let go of your car.
Right. I mean, I guess to your point, it does take some planning. I take it do you work out of your home now?
At this point, yes.
Yeah. So that's perfect. But like you said, even if you don't, if you can, not everyone can, but if you can live close to work.
Yeah, it's just planning. You know what? So much about money is planning, isn't it? It's just thinking about things differently, like buying things in bulk, or so you planned to go to the store and get your toilet paper such that you can buy it for a cheaper amount of money per roll, and these
Besides,
sort.
who likes running out? I mean, that's just not good.
No, it's not good. But having a living car free, if you want to do it, it just requires planning. And if anybody wants to live car free or look into that, I would be free to help them do that.
Okay. Well, if someone wants to reach out to you, is realmoneylife.com the place to go?
Oh, sure. You come over there and friend me just like on Facebook and ask me how to be car free, and I'll be happy to do it, help you with
Perfect.
it.
Well, that's very generous of you. I really appreciate it.
Sure, no problem, Robert.
All right, Alan. Well, thank you for your time. Appreciate hearing your story.
Yeah, thank you. It's been fun.
A big thank you to Alan for taking the time to come on the show. I hope you found that interview helpful and interesting. I did. It's fun just to see how other people do things and different perspectives. I've always owned a car, and there's a part of me that kind of is envious of his sort of lifestyle. I don't know how well I would adjust to not owning a car. I know that it would be very difficult to do that where I live outside of Washington, D.C., but certainly, apparently where he lives, and certainly in many places, I think it's much easier to get by without a car. But I wanted to share that with you so you can kind of get a different perspective on how other people live. And by the way, you may be listening to this and you don't own a car, and so, if you want to share your story, shoot me an email. I'd love to hear from you, dr@DoughRoller.net. That being said, now let's talk about those, everyone else that does own a car. I mean, how do the numbers work for you? Now, remember, for someone that buys a new car, not an outrageously expensive car, not a cheap one either, $20,000, but if they invested that money over a lifetime, $1.9 million, what if we change it a little bit? Compare that person to someone who always has a car, but let's just assume that maybe they buy one every 10 years instead of every 5. They keep their car for 10 years. It's still a $20,000 car, and but they keep it for 10 years. And as I thought about this, I thought, well, the trade-in value would be less, right? They're keeping it an extra 5 years. So I assumed rather than a $10,000 trade-in, they'd only get 5. Again, we can argue with the numbers. Maybe there's a more precise way to do it. But I did feel like I should lower the trade-in value. Obviously, the car is going to be older. And so that's what I assumed. One car every 10 years instead of every 5. And you'd pay for your second through fifth car, because you'd only have now a total of 5 cars. You'd pay $15,000 out of pocket because your trade-in value would only be worth $5,000. And I ran the numbers. Of course, the first car that you buy at age 20 or 25 it costs the same, $20,000, and so its future value still $938,000. But car 2 drops to $325,000, car 3 to $150,000, car 4 to $69,000, and car 5 to $32,000. Again, all those numbers are in the show notes if you want to look at them. But when you add it all up, $1.5 million. So by driving one car 5 years longer, you save $400,000 over a lifetime. You multiply that by 2 for a family where you have 2 cars. You've just saved $800,000. That even if you adjust it for inflation, that's a lot of money, and it's also far more than the average person has saved for retirement. Far more, including not just taking in the younger folks who haven't had much time to save, but even if you look at folks at retirement age, that number is bigger, far bigger than what the average person has for retirement. And all we've done is made a slight adjustment to how we deal with cars. At least, well, I think it's a slight adjustment. I do understand there are those out there who their passion are cars. I'm not trying to get you to change how you're living. I'm just kind of showing you the numbers and what they mean. I was sort of big into cars for a while, and then later just changed. My wife's car is 13 years old. Our van is 10 years old. The newest car we have, I bought used. It's 4 or 5 years old, and no plans to sell it. So, I'd like to get down to 2 cars, but that's a whole nother story. So just driving the car an extra 5 years saves a lot of money. There's a lot of, you see a lot of articles about buying new versus used, and that's an interesting issue, I guess. I've never been as big on that. Last car I bought was used. The other 2 cars we have, though, I bought new. To me, the bigger issue than new versus used is what kind of car you buy and how long you keep it. That to me will drive more savings potentially than the new versus used debate. But they all matter; they're all important. But you just drive the car an extra 5 years, and you're saving roughly $400,000. And again, that's per car. You may own two, or goodness, you may be miserable like me and have more than two cars. So then I thought, well, why not take it a step further and drive the car for 15 years? Why not? I've got a car that's 13 years old, and it's my wife's, and if she wanted to get a new car, we'd buy her a new car, but she doesn't want one. Now, 15 years, back in the day, you couldn't own. I mean, I can remember back in the day when a car went over 100,000 miles, you called your buddies over to look at the odometer. It's like, look at that thing. All those digits filled up. It was amazing. Today, it's nothing to get 200,000 or 300,000 miles out of a car, at least a good quality car. And so what would the numbers look like if you kept a car for 15 years? Well, the bottom line, $1.35 million. So that's another 150,000 savings. So now we're up to about 550 savings. Now, again, something to keep in mind. The reason I show you these numbers is because I think it's important for us to understand how these sort of day-to-day and month-to-month decisions impact our finances. Because we don't look at numbers like this generally. We just look at that month-to-month. But that doesn't mean, of course, that even if you think, this is maybe I need to rethink how I'm paying for cars. It doesn't mean that you have to own every single car you have for exactly 10 or exactly 15 years, right? You can certainly start to make changes in your own finances and your own life that improve your financial freedom, including how you deal with cars. We own our cars now, except for the one we bought a few years ago, for a pretty long time, but we haven't always. And the fact is, I made decisions about cars back in the day that weren't that smart. That's okay. You live, you learn, and you make some changes. And at the end of the day, I don't know, maybe you're going to say, no, Rob, I lease my car and I'm going to lease a new one every 2 years. Okay, that's your decision to make. I'm just trying to show you the numbers to get us to look at this issue. And it's a very practical issue, buying a car, in perhaps a slightly different way. Now, before I wrap up this topic, one last idea, and that is, I've been assuming a $20,000 car. What if you spent $15,000 instead, and you drove it for 15 years before buying a new one? And let's just assume it was worthless at the end. There was no trade-in value. You gave it to charity or something. So you spent $15,000 a year for a car, and you drove it for 15 years. Again, as in our previous example, I may not have said this, it comes out to 4 cars total. How much would you spend total, spending $15,000 a year and driving your car for 15 years before you bought a new one? Just over $1 million. So now we've shaved off from our original hypothetical $900,000, and that's per car. You multiply that by 2 for a family, and it's just, to me, it's mind-numbing how much you can save by changing the way you approach cars. Again, I've tried to give you some extremes, all the way from not owning a car at all to buying one every 5 years, and then all of these hypotheticals that are in between, buying one every 10 years, buying one every 15 years, and of course buying a slightly less expensive car. Every situation is different. Again, my point here isn't to tell you how you should buy a car or how many you should own or what you should drive. That's up to you. But I am trying to show that these decisions have a profound impact on our finances over the long term and our ability to achieve financial freedom and financial security. And hey, I think that's what this podcast is all about. Now, at this point in the show, what I normally do is turn to a bunch of reader questions. I'm not going to do that today. No reader questions today. And you may be saying, Rob, what's going on? Well, here's the deal. I have been flooded with email. And by the way, don't keep them coming. I love them. But what I found is, adding a couple at the end of a podcast, even if it makes it longer, those that listen regularly know I've been doing longer podcasts. And by the way, I've heard some good reaction from that. I've heard some not so good reaction. Nothing horrible, but some people say, it's fine, but I prefer shorter. Other people like it. The reality is, no matter what I do, some are going to like it, some aren't. So there you go. No one has, though, emailed me and said, this is just god awful. Please don't, stop recording at the 25-minute mark. Maybe that email will come now. By the way, I got an email that I think I'm going to read in a future show. It was the funniest subject line. It said, "You're an idiot." And then, just kidding. I like that. Very good. Yeah, sometimes I am an idiot. Anyway, see, I've lost my train of thought. Oh, yeah, no reader questions. So I've been buried with it, answering a couple at the end of the show, or as a segment on the show. I'm just not getting. I've got email now. I've responded to this email, but I've got email back to February that is in the queue to be part of a show. And so it occurred to me that if I keep just doing 2 or 3 questions or 4 questions or whatever at the end of a show, I'm quickly going to get to the point where I'll be answering last year's questions in the show. So what I'm going to try as an experiment, both for me and also for you, is to do a show that just does nothing but answer questions. Now, I'm not going to get through all of them. I don't know how many I'll do, probably 8 or 10, something like that. But I'm thinking maybe I'll start to do that once a week to try to work through those questions so that those folks that write in and send me an email, I can get to their questions on the show faster, because I'm tending to reduce the amount of information I put in an email reply to folks, simply because it's just too time consuming. And oftentimes just say, hey, I got your email, great question. I'll include it in a future show. That's kind of where I'm moving to, just to sort of deal with the flood of email. But this way I'll be able to get to it, before 2019. So that's what I'm going to do. The next show will be answering a number of your questions. So keep the emails coming. Love to receive them. DoughRoller.net. One thing I want to stress too before closing the show out, and is that, this podcast, like my blog, is for informational, educational purposes. I'm not a certified financial planner. I'm not an investment advisor. I'm not a CPA. I'm not a tax professional. I work hard to provide information that I think is useful to you and accurate, but I'm not perfect and I make mistakes. So if you see something, either in an article on the blog, or if I've said something that's just flat out wrong, shoot me an email, dr@DoughRoller.net. And people have done that before. And you can even call me an idiot if you want. That's okay. I call myself that. But I want to hear from you, because if I've made a mistake, or if, sometimes something needs clarification, or maybe I've just missed something that could have been added that would have been really useful. I love to get that kind of stuff, and then I can share it with everyone else, and we can all benefit from it. But I wanted to stress that. And finally, a big thank you for the folks that have been leaving reviews on iTunes. I mentioned a while back I wanted to go over 100 reviews. I think I had 97. You guys, before I could even look at how many reviews I had, I was at 110 or 115. I think I'm over 120 now. But I really appreciate the folks that have gone and left a review. If you haven't, and you have a minute, I'd be grateful. Just go over to iTunes, just search for DoughRoller. You'll find the podcast. Leave me a review. Lets me know what I'm doing right, what I'm doing wrong, where I can improve. Appreciate it. As always, again, feel free to email me, dr@DoughRoller.net. Would love to hear from you. Hey, until next time, remember, the best thing money can buy is financial freedom.